Today we're going to talk about how to take good notes out of a book, for class, out of journal articles. So let's discuss. I'm going to show you how my method works and hopefully it's helpful. I just want to share some of the tips that really help me along the way and things I share with incoming graduate students, ones who need to learn how to make that jump from just taking notes by rote or just taking notes down from the book, rewriting things from the book, and moving towards really being able to write notes that you don't have to study, that just help you analyze and think further. So for me, that starts with the books. You read before you go to class, or you read journal articles, or watch videos before you go to class, something like that. And your class that day will be about that stuff. So if you've read it beforehand, if you understand it before you get there, you don't have to take a bunch of notes in class on the subject that you read. That makes no sense. You've already done that. So first, let's start with the book. So when you begin, you sit down with your book. I first just read. I don't write, I just read. First things first, let's turn to the table of contents and see how this book is broken up, because that will help you determine how to study it. So this is very straightforward in chapters. That's normal. So, you know, you're a teacher, you're a professor, will tell you how many chapters they want you to read. So that's easy, right? So then if there's an introduction, read the introduction. That is always something you should do. The author can tell you a lot about the book from that, and it can help you focus on the necessary points in the book. If there's no intro, just move on in. So I'm at the first chapter, and I could just start reading, but as in most books, there are diagrams, there are little asides to read. So that's what I do first, so that when I'm reading through, I don't have to break up my reading and look at a chart. So first thing I do is look at charts, anything that stands out, that's a graph, a chart, a figure, anything along those lines. Whether I understand it or not, I read that first, because I don't want to break up the reading that I have to do later, and then I might not do it after I've read. So do that first. Then you're ready to move into the first chapter. What you're going to do is, as you're reading, you're going to mark what you're going to write. So as you read, you need to determine what's important, what summarizes the section. So we have a whole chapter here, but this chapter is broken up by bold headings. So this section ends here, and this is where the next section begins. So I need to figure out what sentences or sentence summarizes all of those pages after I read it. But as I read, what I do is I put brackets around the most important sentences. So let's say I read these first 3 paragraphs, and what really sums up these paragraphs is a sentence, 1 sentence or 2 sentences, and we'll say it's this sentence right here. Now that might not necessarily be true, this is just for example. So what I do is I put brackets around that sentence. So when I go back to write, I know exactly where to head. So I've done that for this section. Then I read the next section, and I do that again. As you can see here, I found 2 sentences that I thought were really important and impactful for this section. And I have a whole few pages here, but these are really the ones that summarized what was happening here. So also along the way, I may run into things that define a word or define a concept that I should remember. So when I run into something like that, I underline it. In this book, however, they have definitions or things that define a concept in a gray box. So I know that's something that I need to concentrate on in my notes. But if they don't, if I find some kind of definition to a word, I underline it. So let's just say this is a definition. So I'm going to underline this definition, and if the word that it's defining or the concept it's defining is not in this sentence, I will write that word here. it's hard to do this upside down. Right there. So that I know what this defines, what concept this defines. That way when I go back, it's not hard for me to figure it out. I don't have to read a bunch to figure it out. Also, if I run into something here that's from a timeline, so let's say this was starting by saying that this started in, I don't know, 2000, and then by 2004 this happens, and then by 2008 this happens. What I do is I'm going to take a page flag right here. It's like this page flag right here. I'm not going to take this one. But what I would do is take a page flag and put it in here, because this page flag can mark for me the timeline. So when I go back after I've written the summaries down, I can go back in my notes and just create a timeline and just put the important points from that timeline, because they're already pinpointed through these page flags. Gotta use the page flags. They're just delightful things. Also, if I run into a word, let's say, it doesn't matter, a word that I just don't know what it means. Let's say I don't know what rebuilding means. Let's say I don't know what that word means. What I do is I circle that word. So I may think I understand it from context clues, or I may not want to break up my reading and go look at that word, define that word. So what I do is when I go back to write down my notes in my notebook, I define that word, and then I make sure I understand it within the concept, within that summary that I've created. So now we've highlighted the important points with brackets, we've underlined any definitions, we circled any words we don't know, and we've put page flags to note any timelines. All things that will help you when you go to write your notes. So if the book is not like this is a simple read. This is not, it flows, it's not hard to read. But if it's more scholarly, like this book, where the author wrote in a very dense word choice. I mean, oh my gosh. The words, you could read it and still not know what he meant. So in this type of book, what I would do is I would summarize every paragraph. So it may seem like overkill, but you don't want to have to go back and read this again. You want to understand it the first time you read it. So I read a paragraph, and then I put a sticky note right there, which this is where your lovely sticky notes come in handy. Remember, I'm a sticky note addict. You take a sticky note and you write a summary of the information in that paragraph, and you put the sticky note right there. You do that for every single paragraph, just like I did right there. Because when a book is that dense, it is very easy to read and read and read and not know what you read. You know, you could be in a quiet room and read every single word and still not be able to summarize what happened in that section. So go ahead and write a summary for every single paragraph. And then just do as I said before. After you've done that, if you run into any definitions, underline them. If you run into words you don't know, which is very likely in a book like this, circle it. In a book like this, I would go and define the word before I hit the next section, and then determine whether that summary I created is affected by the change in that word, in defining that word. And then I move on to the next section. If there's a timeline, I put page flags just like before. But if you use the method of summarizing each paragraph, it makes it a lot more manageable and a lot less painful. So now that you've gotten all that done, you've read, you understand, you've already broken up your chapters into sections, manageable sections. So now let's go ahead and take some notes in our notebook. So now we're going to take the information from that book and put it in our notebook. And this is your second point of study. So first thing I do is put the title of the book up here along with the author's name. So when I go to my notes, I'm not confused. Another option is to put a tab right here and it's say the chapter that you're studying here. That way you can easily reference your notes later. So I also put the name of the chapter that I am writing a summary on. So now I break up my page into the Cornell note-taking method type of page. However, I don't do exactly what's in that method. So at the bottom here, I've created a line in the last, let's say, 4 lines here. This is college ruled, so they're smaller lines. And I've created a line here. And then I created a line on the side. This is about an 1.5 inch, 2-inch column here. And then this middle section is where I'm writing my summary. And in this summary, I am going to put, let me see if you can see this. Everything that I bracketed, I am going to write that information here summarized in a way that I understand it, in a way that speaks to me. I am going to write that information here, all the bracketed portions. And I'm not going to write full sentences. That's not necessary. Don't waste your time and energy. This is your summary. You are summarizing the chapter. So don't write full sentences and just do those bracketed portions that you have done. The underlined portions, put those in here as well. But if it's a concept, if it's a definition, write the title of that concept or the word that you're defining, underline it. And then following that, write the definition of that concept or that word in a full sentence. Complete full sentence. That way, the concept sticks out in your notes and you haven't shortened it so it takes on a different meaning as opposed to what the author wanted by writing what they wrote in the book. So for concepts and definitions, write the name of the concept, write the name of the word you're defining, underline it, and then proceed to write out what that concept or word means. If you're creating a timeline, you can easily do that now. You have it mapped out from the book. So just go back in your notes and create your timeline. You can do it this way where you just put the date and then put the word next to it, or you can create an actual line and put the dates here and, ooh, I don't know, that's backwards, and write words here so it's an actual line. I am not good at writing backwards. Yeah, that's all backwards. So it's an actual line. So this is summarizing what's in the book precisely. Then, once you've read everything, once you've put your summary here of everything you read, you need to think about it and connect the concepts. So then you're able to write 3 questions for class. So think about the concepts. Think about what you need further answers on. Maybe this concept wasn't crystal clear to you, or maybe you don't understand how this concept connects to the title of your subject or what subject matter of your course or what subject matter you're studying. Or maybe you just want to know what other materials out there concerning this concept because maybe you want to write a paper on it in the future. So think of 3 questions to ask or 3 reflections to talk about in class. So write those 3 right here, and I just put STU instead of 1, 2, 3 just to be contrary. And then when you get to class, you don't have to rewrite any of this. Bring your notes with you, okay? You don't have to rewrite any of this. You've written it. If your professor says something that you've already written, why rewrite it? Don't do that. Highlight it. If they say this concept and you've already defined it in a way that they just said in different words, but basically the same way, highlight it because that says to you, hey, this is important. Not only did I read it, your professor reinforced it, which makes it extra important, but you don't have to write it again because you wrote it once. Don't waste your time. Pay attention to what they're saying instead. And then if they say stuff that's not in your note, write it in this right column here. This is further explanation column. This is when your teacher tells you new resources, this is where you write all that here. If you need to elaborate on something that you've written here, you can write that right next to it in this column, right here. It just makes sense, right? And make sure you use the paper front and back. Don't waste paper. That's just wrong. Don't waste paper. And just continue to do it the same way. Write your summary here. This is for class. And then once you go to class, now you're done with class. As soon as you get home, just like in Cornell note taking, we're going to summarize what happened in class. So at the bottom here, at the end of your notes, so this is your last page of notes, you've got this column here, summarize the information from class in 3 sentences or less. You shouldn't have to write full paragraph. You have all these notes telling you all the nitty-gritty details. Instead, you just want to write down the concept you were supposed to take away from class that day, right here. Now, if in class you're like, oh, I don't have any space, I don't have any more space, I want to write a lot more, maybe you've moved on to something else, some other subject, all you need to do is draw a line at the end of whatever notes you were taking, and just right here, right under it, in that summary section, just write that information. You know, don't be a slave to your process and to the way you've set up your paper. Make sure that you are just getting the information. That's all that matters. You're getting it down. Maybe this is where you write the answers to the questions that you asked in class. Maybe this is where you write those answers. Or if your professor suggests further avenues for study, you write that here. So just, you know, but you also don't want to add information that doesn't relate to what you've studied, what you've really been talking about, without making some designation that it's new information, that it's separate information, that it's different information. So when you go back to look at it, you're not searching frantically for something that you can't find because it's on a subject that's totally separate. So just make sure you make that difference in your notes. So that's the note taking at home, so when you go to class, you're not lost, and when your teacher asks, you know, so tell me what you thought of the reading, you have some thoughts. You've done your notes, and that is your second point of study. You just studied twice. When you read it, you learned, when you read the information, you synthesized it, you analyzed it right in that moment. When you wrote it down, you studied it. You figured out what the important points were. You put together timelines, you put together theories and definitions. You really studied it. You wrote it. And that gives you the third point of study. Putting it on paper, writing it, is another way to get it into your body, get it into your brain. People who aren't visual, it's just a way to help you. So if they're reinforcing what you've already read, this is a fourth point of study. Gosh, it's really in your brain at this point, right? You don't have to study these notes again unless maybe you have a test. But even then, you don't really have to study these notes again because you've reinforced it for yourself 4 times by the time you leave class that day. And you have a great foundation for writing a paper, any paper. And that is a beautiful thing. Oftentimes, I use the points where I have page flags as citation points for a paper. It's just beautiful. Also, topics that your teacher has discussed in class, great paper point, great paper writing tip. And lastly, and not least important, is that you've learned something that you can connect to your future career, to your next course, and you're not just taking classes and wasting your money, you're learning something from what you're doing. And that is the most important part. That's all the professors want you to get. They want you to get something from their class, whatever it is. And you've just made your life easier. You know, those 4 points of study mean that you don't have to, at the end of the semester, when you have your midterm paper or your final term paper or test, this is not information that's new. It's not information that you half understood, just thought you'd go back to later, or that you half studied. You had 4 to 5 points of study. So you're fine. The end of the semester is going to be a cinch because you understand the work and you've analyzed it and you took good notes. So I hope this video was helpful. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you thought, what you think. Give me any of your tips for note taking. I'd love to hear them. And I'll see you next time. Check out my Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and the blog. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye. I wrote that this paper is due right here. And I wrote the guidelines for that paper here so that I know what I have to turn in here.